So I got into politics in 2008, but it wasn't until shortly after the great financial crisis that I really started to delve deep into history, political and economic theories, psychology, and every other rabbit hole the internet had to offer at the time. This period was when I was first introduced to libertarianism. I started learning about Austrian economics, monetary policy, and the concept of competing currencies. Many libertarians were frustrated with the fiscal and monetary policy of the United States government and Federal Reserve, and how those policies were destroying the value of the dollar. There were many hard money advocates calling for people to buy gold and silver and why we needed a return to the gold standard. And there was also a camp that was talking about getting into this new type of currency, a cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. Now, at the time, I was going through like major information overload. I didn't know what to think or believe. I was basically, I was having a hard time because I was encountering so much information that I wasn't familiar with, and it was pretty overwhelming. And also, I'd never done any real investing at this point. I didn't have a retirement account, had never bought any precious metals, and to be honest, like Bitcoin seemed very much like a scam. I understood the principle of it, but was not confident enough to buy or invest in it. Plus, like I just didn't have any money. I mean, throwing $100 on something back then, I mean, it's still a lot, but I don't have money to just be throwing around like that. And also remember, this was like the early days of crypto. It was a little more complicated than just opening up a Robinhood account and buying some crypto. Although I remember watching Adam Kokesh, who is this libertarian activist. I used to follow him. I think he was a great voice for liberty. But he was out showing people. I think it was at maybe Pork Fest. It was some libertarian type convention thing. But there were people and they were using Bitcoin at a vending machine, and he was encouraging people to get out of dollars and get into Bitcoin. And well, fast forward to today, and I'm kicking myself for not throwing a few $100 into Bitcoin because that could have been life changing. So now that I've given you my brief personal history with Bitcoin, and I've conceded the fact that it's definitely a speculative asset that an individual can make a fortune with, let me tell you why I find it to be extremely suspicious, and I think it's a distraction. So, the Bitcoin concept came from a white paper written by someone named Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. And on January 3rd, 2009, Nakamoto mined the starting block of the chain, and that was the beginning of Bitcoin on its way to its fixed cap of 21 million Bitcoin. And you see, that's why the advocates for Bitcoin say it'll be better currency than the dollar because it's a decentralized blockchain, digital public ledger, and it won't be able to have its value inflated away by an out of control government. Now, see, my biggest issue with it is that just like the dollar, it's backed by nothing. There's no use for Bitcoin. It doesn't produce anything. It doesn't, you can't use Bitcoin to create energy. You can't eat it. It can't be used for industrial purposes. You can't use it as jewelry. And not to mention, it's just digital. There's nothing physical about it. Like I remember when Texas had that power grid failure like a year or two ago, like due to it got so cold that their power grid was failing and people lost all the electricity. So if you've got no access to electricity, and like let's just say there's a EMP attack or any other kind of crisis, well, you're completely cut off now. You have no access to any of your money. So that's I'm always very skeptical about things that are just strictly digital. But so back to the guy that started it, Satoshi Nakamoto. Well, nobody knows who this dude is. Like you can Google his name, and it might bring up an image of a guy, but that's just some AI generated image of somebody that they think would be what Satoshi Nakamoto looks like. But nobody knows who he is. It was the paper, and all of this was done by somebody else under a pseudonym. There's speculation about different tech guys that might have been involved in it. There was even a theory floating around at one point that Alan Greenspan was actually Satoshi Nakamoto, because before Alan Greenspan became the Fed chairman, he wrote an article for Ayn Rand's objectivist newsletter. It was called Gold and Economic Freedom, and he was talking about, how important gold was to, free society and returning to the gold standard or continuing the gold standard. And there's Bitcoin advocates that say that Bitcoin is like the new modern day gold standard. And there's also theories that it was created by the CIA. But I have a bit of a different theory, and I think that Bitcoin was started by the BRICS countries. So the BRICS countries are a global alliance consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And in recent years, it's expanded to include several other countries. Now, the BRICS alliance has always been dismissed by Western critics, and for years they've said that they're illegitimate. They're no threat to, our system. But I mean, like I said, like around this time, like when BRICS was really becoming a thing, that was like around the time that I was getting into, politics. And so I've always kind of been concerned. And again, everybody I've talked to is always very dismissive of my concerns. But, they've been developing entire systems and networks and infrastructures, to create, a new system to rival the current world system that we operate in today. And not necessarily that I think what we're operating in is, the best. Like there's definitely some changes that I'd like to see. But I definitely don't want ours to collapse. Like they've got the new development bank basically rivaling the IMF. The SWIFT payment system that we use for like international payments, they've created one called SIPS. And again, everybody's very dismissive of it, but there's a lot of energy going into this BRICS alliance, and also a lot of interest from these other countries. Now, the BRICS countries developed their unofficial alliance through the early 2000s, and then they had their first full-scale diplomatic meeting in 2009, the same year that Bitcoin was launched. Now, Bitcoin came out earlier in the year than the official, I guess branding of the BRICS, but it was the same time. And the BRICS countries were openly calling for a new global reserve currency system to replace the dollar. And this is where I see Bitcoin entering in as the distraction. You see, the great financial crisis had just happened. It woke a lot of people up to the problems of the dollar. And immediately following the great financial crisis, President Obama's stimulus spending spree and the Fed's quantitative easing programs, gold took off to new highs. And now gold came back down a bit and set a new floor and faded off for several years. But there was definitely, after 2008, there was a lot more interest in getting into gold and silver and, other assets that were outside of the dollar. Now, it was also during this time that crypto started to catch on and people started buying into Bitcoin. Now, I think if the Bitcoin crypto market is never created, much of that demand would have gone into gold and silver and other precious metals. But crypto was created, and it kind of helped keep the price of gold down, while foreign central banks around the world were able to slowly bleed off their treasuries and buy up gold. And that's a process that's still continued, and it's greatly accelerated in recent years, especially after the U.S. weaponized the dollar through their sanctions against Russia. And now, my next concern is that Bitcoin and crypto are also acting like, basically it's not just like, it's not just a blanket thing like, okay, it's just a BRICS thing so they can keep people distracted while they continue to buy up all the gold. But my other concern is that it's a Trojan horse for CBDCs, which are central bank digital currencies, and even like potentially like a globalized CBDC system. Now you see like people that, are crypto advocates, they say, well, this is nonsense, and then they talk about all the differences between crypto and CBDCs and how they're not the same. And they're absolutely right. Crypto is not CBDC. Central bank digital currencies would be a centralized currency that would be operated by the government with like potential for major abuses, like especially like, surveillance abuses, loss of financial privacy, basically allowing the government to track, trace, and tax every transaction that you're involved with. And not only would they be able to like basically like monitor everything you're doing, but like CBDCs can also be programmable, meaning that like whatever group or government or bank that like runs your central bank digital currency, they would be able to like place restrictions on your money and how you spend it. Like they could give you a food or a fuel ration for the month. Oh, you've eaten too much red meat this month. That's bad for the environment because of the, emissions from the cows. So, the cow methane. So we're going to cut you off from your red meat. Or, oh, you hit your $100 ration for fuel this month. So no more fuel for your vehicle. Guess you better get on your bicycle and or walk around, or maybe limit how much ammunition that you buy. Or they could even program your currency that you're not even allowed to purchase guns. And I understand that cryptocurrency is nothing like what I just described related to central bank digital currency. And I'm not saying that crypto should be banned or regulated or anything like that. I'm just saying I personally don't like cryptocurrency. Now, central bank digital currencies, on the other hand, they should be resisted and never allowed to be implemented. Like I see CBDCs as like that's the end game of total government control, because once they control your money, I mean, not that they don't already have a lot of control over the system, but once they have direct control over your money, I mean, it's over. I mean, they'd be able to, that's that whole, like the conspiracy about getting chipped. It's like, well, they could just turn it on, turn it off. And that's exactly what they could do. Like once your money is like completely under their control, they can just, flip the switch and you're cut off from your money. And now the reason that I think crypto is a Trojan horse for that is because most people don't know anything about cryptocurrency, and most people have never even heard about central bank digital currencies. So, if the government attempts to implement a CBDC, they'll just, calm people's concerns and fears by telling them that central bank digital currencies are just like crypto, only safer because the government will control it and regulate it and make sure it's not abused. They might even do something like implement a universal basic income program. And then, in order to get your access to your universal basic income, go ahead and come down to your Federal Reserve, Federal Reserve Bank, or just get online and you'll have a Federal Reserve account. But basically, I think the crypto is softening people up to the idea. It's conditioning them for CBDCs. And this is another reason why I don't like using cash apps like PayPal or anything else like that, because I think the more that we use cash, the less easier it will be for the government to ban the use of it, because that's going to be something that they're going to push for. They've been pushing for it. I remember they had an article years ago. They were referring to cash as your bin Ladens. They were saying, get rid of your bin Ladens, because they were talking about how cash is used to finance terrorism. And why cash is so bad. And central banks have been wanting to ban cash for years. They've written numerous white papers on banning cash, and then how they could use negative interest rates to spur economic activity. Because see, if your money's in an account, you can't just pull it out if there's no cash. It's stuck in that account. So the bank would be able to impose negative interest rates, meaning, let's say you had $1,000 in the bank, and then they say, well, we're going to impose a negative 2%, fee on your account. So, every however many days, you're going to get 20% charged out of your account. And so, I mean, if you're going to lose money, you're going to be there's more of an incentive for you to go out and spend your money. And that's what central bankers always say. They need more control. They need more scalpel-like control over the economy. And that's what they always say. Whenever things go wrong, that's always the excuse. Well, we couldn't account for this and we couldn't account for that. Central bankers always want more control. And, crypto's becoming more mainstream. Financial institutions are starting to integrate crypto into their investment strategies. They're using crypto ETFs. And what if crypto is one of the things that leads to the next economic crisis? Then the government will come down. They'll just, say that there was too much room for manipulation and fraud in cryptocurrency, and that's why we need, they'll say we're not completely opposed to it. That's why we've got this central bank digital currency, and that will be their bailout solution to try to fix, the problems of the economy that they've been destroying for years. So, I don't want to discourage anybody from, investing or speculating in crypto. Like that's not my goal here. I'm not a financial advisor. I've recently speculated on some crypto myself. I threw some money in XRP just for the hell of it. Some people like to bet on sports and things like that. Well, I don't really like to do that. I'd rather, throw some money in a brokerage account or throw some money on some crypto. Or if I've got money to blow, I'd rather do that than just bet it on gaming or something like that. So, I'm not really trying to discourage anybody. I just want people to think about, what's really going on and what potentially the angles will be in the future that the government might try to do. So, but anyway, thanks for listening. If you like what I'm saying, like it, subscribe. I appreciate any support, comment, let me know. This is not my thing, like I'm not very good at like the tech thing. I'm very ate up with politics and the economy and things like that. And for years, I've just been the guy that drones on and wears people out. So now, at least if you're listening, it's because you're tuning in and listening and not because you're just stuck in my geographic location and forced to listen to me. So, but anyway, thanks for listening. Have a good day.